How many of you know that we're in the middle of a culture war? There's a war. In our culture, there's a war, not just so much against Christmas, but against the idea of this country even being founded on a Judeo-Christian ethic. We want in our culture today, politically speaking, we want to literally divorce ourselves from more than 200 years of history where we have acknowledged the living God, where we have acknowledged that the Bible is the foundation of our entire culture, of our entire country. We're rapidly beginning to see a rebellion against what Christmas means. In fact, the idea is to try to marginalize or mythologize, I guess that would be the right word, Christmas. We want to change the Christmas story, and we want to change the entire holiday. It is now no longer Christmas. It is now a winter holiday, and since you can celebrate it any way you want to, we're going to avoid even talking about the real Christmas story at all. We're not even going to mention it. We're going to try to avoid it in one way or another. Why would we want to do this? Why does this culture so quickly and so easily want to marginalize the Christmas story? Because the Christmas story is about Emmanuel, God with us. Now, one of the things that we have to realize, and I really want you to understand this because your culture tries to change everything. It's trying to change everything in the public school system. It's trying to change everything in the media. It's trying to tell you that there's no such thing as real truth. I mean, you've got your idea of truth and so has their idea of truth, and everybody is equal, and we need to quit suggesting that one idea of truth is more superior to another. How dare you do that? Not understanding that the nature of truth is that this many and this many is this many, whether you like it or not. I mean, truth is that thing which corresponds to what is real, whether or not you want to admit that. See, there's a lot of people, they want to say that this many and this many is 65 million, and I want to tell my bank that. And since it's my truth, after all, the bank should agree with my truth. How many of you would like that? I mean, that would be nice. But you know what? People can talk all day long about how my truth and your truth, but the banks, they understand math truth. There is only one right answer to a sum, and all other answers are incorrect. That's the nature of truth. Truth is something that we can know. And one of the things that we can know is that there cannot be opposites. Opposites cannot be the same thing. You either have A or you have non-A. There's nothing in the middle. It's called the principle of the excluded middle. There's nothing in the middle. Now, what that means is there really is a theistic God, or there really is not. There is nothing in the middle. And the reason that people want to make the Christmas story into a myth, the reason they want to tear it down, is because they don't want to admit that the real God really exists. And because he really exists, you and I have a responsibility to answer to him. We don't like that idea. We don't like the idea that Christmas is about an invasion. Planet Earth is rebel-occupied territory. Humans control this planet. We don't want to answer to God. We want to run things our own way and destroy ourselves. Thank you very much. We don't want God. And we work very hard to suppress the truth in our wickedness. That's what human beings do. So the idea that God himself would invade the human race, God with us, it's something we want to ignore. And we attack it in various different ways. We don't want it to be true. That's what our culture is all about. We want to talk about the baby Jesus story, and it's nice and it's cute. We don't want to talk about the fact that the baby in the manger is the living God in human flesh. We don't want to go there. Because if we did, we would have to admit that what Jesus said and what Jesus did is absolutely true. How many of you understand that concept? I mean, if God says it, how many of you know it has to be true? God can only speak in a way that corresponds with who he is. And God is absolute truth. God is absolute purity. God is absolute holiness. Now, this is very important for us to understand. Because if the real God exists, then that means that miracles are possible. How many of you know that? Real miracles. You know why I know that? Because the universe exists at all. Here's what I mean by that. Scientists know that when they look out and they see the second law of thermodynamics and the first law of thermodynamics and relativity and all these sorts of things, and they look at the expansion of the universe and background radiation and all this stuff. What do they know? They know that the universe had a beginning. And because they know the universe had a beginning, that means it all came from nothing. Nothing at all. So you have two choices. You either believe there is a being that is greater than time, space, and matter, somebody who is eternal, somebody who can create everything out of nothing sheerly by his will and power. Or you believe that absolutely nothing gave birth to absolutely everything for absolutely no reason. Those are your two choices. There cannot be opposites. It's one or the other. Now, which one do you want to have faith in? Somebody say God. God. Okay, that makes much more sense. But if God exists, miracles are possible. And you know what miracles mean? Miracle is a confirmation of God's truth through a messenger of God. And the New Testament documents, which we know are reliable beyond any doubt, confirm very clearly that Jesus said, I am. I'm God. I'm God in the flesh. And he proved it. How? By raising himself from the dead. How many of you know that's quite a trick? I mean, you either are God or you are not. There is no way around it. And Jesus came for a purpose. People don't want to hear this story. They don't want that part of the Christmas story. They don't want that to come through. We would much rather talk about jingle bells and Santa Claus and reindeer. I don't mind either one of those, and I hear reindeer tastes good, but that's not a problem. That's not the issue. The issue is that we have a reaction, we have a visceral reaction to Christmas in this culture. And you're going to run into that. Many of your friends, if you are one of those weirdo Christians like me that really believe this, you're going to run in to a lot of people that really don't. And coming up here at Christmas, maybe some of them will be your family. And they're going to come in and they're going to react to you. Well, I want to ask you this morning, which reaction will you have to the Christmas story? And how are you going to deal with others when they have their reaction to the Christmas story? You see, I think that we can find 6 specific reactions to the Christmas story. We can find those in the characters that are in the story. Now, you all know the story. How many of you know the story? How many of you missed it and I have to tell it again? Nope, nobody. Everybody got it. So rather than going through the whole story again, I want to go through it in pieces. And I want to talk about the reactions that people have to the Christmas story. Let's take a look at Luke chapter 2, verse 7. It says, and she, Mary, gave birth to her firstborn son. And she wrapped him in cloths, and placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. A manger. This is a place where animals eat. That's where they were. Why were they in this place? Because there was an innkeeper who said, I don't have room for you. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk about this innkeeper for a minute. The truth of the matter is we don't know a whole lot about this guy. We don't know anything more, really, than the fact that he worked in Bethlehem and he did not have room for a poor pregnant lady that's pounding on his front door. Didn't have room for him. Now, honestly, the census had brought them into town. And part of you, probably like me, wants to give the guy a little bit of room here. I mean, come on. The place is loaded. Your inn is totally packed. You really, really honestly do not have room for a pregnant lady and her soon-to-be husband. You don't have room for them. And the only way you would have room is either you throw somebody else out into the barn, but they're paying customers, right? There's these poor folks out here in the cold. They're not paying. So me as an innkeeper, why in the world should I get rid of a paying customer for some poor slob who's 9 months pregnant? I'll tell you what. Go stay in the straw and in the cow poop if you want. But I don't have time for you. That's pretty heavy. I mean, if you think about it for a moment, we really don't know who he is, but he seems to me to be one of those really successful business people. He has gotten where he's gotten by hard work. How many of you know in the first century, owning your own business and having a successful inn, especially in Bethlehem, would have been a tough go? I mean, Bethlehem was 5 miles from the gates of Jerusalem at that time. So this would have been basically more than just the suburbs. This would have been the cheap seats. I mean, everybody coming into town for the Passover, they would have stayed at the nicer places in Jerusalem. This was the Motel 6 of its day. Does that make sense? So he's worked hard to be successful in a difficult time and in a difficult place. This is the kind of guy that's given his all to dealing with being a successful businessman. But you know what else I think? I can't prove it. But it seems to me, since the Bible clearly says to take care of the poor, right? The Bible clearly says that, somebody knocking on your door that needs help, you're supposed to do something about it. That's Old Testament, that's New Testament. This guy lived in Judah. He lived in that culture. He knew what he should do. But throwing somebody out into the barn, to me, means two things. It means that he's going, well, I got a religious duty. Got to do something. There's a lot of, I haven't cleaned out the stalls in a couple of weeks, but it doesn't smell all that great. And if you have a kid in there, could be an insurance problem. But I'll tell you what, you can stay out there. Why? Because he had at least a little twinge of, I got to do something. What's religion to a guy like this? Well, it's good for the wife, right? It's good for the kids. We show up at Passover and we do the things we're supposed to do, but it's once a year kind of a thing. It's not in my heart. It's not real. Why? Because I'm too darn busy. I'm too darn practical. That's kind of the sense I get out of this guy. I mean, I can't prove it. For all I know, this guy got saved under Jesus' ministry 20 years later, and we'll see him in heaven. He'll go, I didn't mean it, honest. It's just, it's a bad day. I don't know. But there's so many people today that are like that, aren't they? They're incredibly practical people. Their idea of church, of being involved, is I got to go at Christmas because if I don't, the old lady's going to be angry at me. Whether that old lady is my wife or my mother, it doesn't matter. But one way or another, I got to go. But I'm a busy guy. I work 6 days a week. And you want me to go and spend another couple of hours listening to some guy yell at me? I'm not interested. There's probably a God out there somewhere. But I'm a successful guy. I'm a decent fellow. I don't rip people off. Not really. Occasionally. But it's no big deal. Right? He'll be cool with me when I croak. And I don't want to think about that anyway. Right? Too busy for that. Sunday's my only day off. It's the only day where I get to sleep in, and you want me to, this whole Bible study and midweek, small group thing, what are you, nuts? I'm going to miss NCIS if I do that. I can't, no. They're very practical. Where's the practical benefit of me going to church? Because if I go to church and I can't use that as an opportunity to sell my widgets because the pastor won't let me, and no, I won't let you. The problem is, why should I bother? There's no practical benefit there. I can't even pass out my business cards. Why should I go? And people like this absolutely cringe at the idea of actually giving money. Why would you give money to a church? I mean, if somebody dies, you throw $20 in, thank you for the funeral, but we're not going to, you want me to give money to a church month in and month out? What are you, nuts? And if you think I overstate the case, there have been not one, not two, but probably more than a dozen, particularly women, who have, over the last 12 years of this church's history, started coming to this church alone. Husbands, no. And the idea of them tithing and giving and offering, not a chance. He won't allow it. Why? That's my hard-earned money. Why should I do that? If it's good for the wife, it's good for the kids, it's fine. Go, have fun. I'm watching TV. See you later. Very real. How many of you know this is not, I'm not making this up. This is consistent. This is everywhere. And, some people think when I say this, I'm being too harsh. No, I'm just saying it like it is. Remember, truth is that thing which corresponds with what is real. And that's what's happening in our world. It's all around us. And some people might say, you're being too harsh. The poor innkeeper, he didn't know it was Jesus. Yeah, but he wasn't looking either. Was he? Everybody knew the Messiah was supposed to be born right around this time of year and right around this time period and in Bethlehem. Right? But he wasn't looking. He just wasn't looking. You see, some people are not looking for God. They're not interested in a spiritual development or a spiritual growth. They're not looking. They don't care. And when they hear the Christmas story, they would much rather focus in on what gifts I am getting rather than the gift that was given. They're not interested. They're not looking. They're too busy focused on their business, focused on their work, focused on entertainment on a Sunday morning, right? The Cardinals playing today, but it's this evening. You could still come to church. Kickoff's not till 6. Relax. I know this. I checked. So many people miss Jesus because they're just not looking. You know what I'm interested in here? Matthew chapter 16, verse 26 says this: what good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world and yet forfeits his own soul? There are plenty of people that have forfeit their own soul because they're trying to gain the whole world in terms of how much money they have coming in terms of how big their retirement is. As a tree trimmer, I do a lot of work in Sun City, and I'm not trying to come down on anybody that lives there or that lifestyle, but I've met many people who their entire lives for 20 years is playing golf. And that's it. They've worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and worked to get a great big house. I remember doing a tree job not long ago, 7,000 square foot house, one old guy living in it by himself. And what do you got? You can work your whole life, gain all of that, and forfeit your own soul. You can do it. It's easy. You see, this whole idea of, I don't want to get involved in church on a Sunday. I'm too busy. It's my one day off. Listen, I can't accept that, because if I did, that would mean that my one day off is more important than forever. I'm here to tell you, I've added it up. I can add even though I wasn't a math major. That doesn't work. Eternity is a lot longer than one day off. And not being focused on growing spiritually in who Jesus is in your life forfeits your soul. And unfortunately, it is possible there can be a lot of that innkeeper in all of us. Don't think for a second, I stand up here and I preach to you. Don't think for a second that I don't come in here sometimes drop dead exhausted. I work 6 days a week. Then I come in here on the 7th, and this is the Sabbath. I'm here. You get to sit. Trust me, by the time I get home this afternoon, I will collapse and I will be out cold for 3 hours. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm trying to tell you that I am willing to work hard all week and still be here for you. Why? Because I want to be an example to you. Because you work hard all week long and you're going, well, should I really come to church? Yes. Yes, don't be the innkeeper. Don't be too busy. Don't be not looking for Jesus. Don't be that guy. But you know there's another one. Look at Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. It says, when Herod the Great, the king, when he realized that he'd been outwitted by the Magi, the wise men. Remember the story? They came in there asking for this king of the Jews. And the religious guys say, yeah, he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem somewhere. Right about this time. And they went to see Jesus. And Herod wanted them to come back and tell him where Jesus was. You remember the story? But they split. They took off. Because they got warned by an angel not to go back to Herod. And when he was outwitted like this, he was furious. So what did he do? He gave orders to kill all of the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under. He wanted to cover everything in accordance with the time that he had learned from these wise men. Kill every 2-year-old in town. What kind of a man would do such an evil thing? Let's think about it for a second. If you know anything about history, King Herod, he was not legitimate in terms of his claim to the throne at that time. He tried to be, and he ruled for more than 40 years. But Herod was not legitimate to the throne. He wasn't Jewish. And he tried to be. He tried to win over the Jewish people. But when that didn't work, he became a paranoid schizophrenic. And the emperor, Caesar, really liked King Herod. And the reason was because Herod was able to keep the peace. And the way he kept the peace was by just plain brutality. You either did it his way and Rome's way, or he's going to wipe you out. Think I'm kidding? In history, we know that King Herod killed his own mother-in-law, killed his son-in-law, killed his wife Mariamne, killed 2 of his own sons. In fact, Caesar said, and this is written down, that it was safer to be King Herod's pig than his son. That's who Herod was. He was absolutely ruthless. He would not allow anybody to threaten his hold of power. Not a chance. Even the slightest breath, he would kill his own son, his own wife, if you threatened his authority in any way. That's who Herod was. And that's a fact of history. And you see, Herod knew the Jewish expectations, didn't he? That's why he asked the religious leaders, when is this Messiah supposed to show up? Why? Because in that time period, everybody knew a Messiah was going to come right around this time period. So there was more than a dozen different people at this time who claimed to be the Messiah and started a revolt. And as you know, Herod was not going to allow anybody to threaten his authority. So he was constantly going out and stamping out fires of people who said, I'm the king, I'm the king, I'm the king. He would not allow this. So he knew that there was this expectation, and he wouldn't tolerate it. So he was willing to do anything. Now, how much did this man hold on to his authority? It is said in history that when this man was dying, we think, medically speaking, looking back on it now, he probably had stomach cancer. Painful beyond words. And it is said in the last week of his life, every breath he took, he was screaming in agony. Screaming. And even then, he would not allow anyone to make a decision except him. Every breath. People lived in terror of what he might scream next because he had many people executed, even in the last week of his life. Even in the midst of screaming, if anybody looked at him the wrong way, he would order them killed in his vindictiveness and his hatred of life, all the way down to his last breath. Talk about a tyrant. That's King Herod. Would not tolerate any rule but his own. Reminds me of a woman I knew. Oh, yes. Absolutely would not allow anybody to threaten her authority in that house, including the husband. Anybody crossed her, she would have a screaming fit of rage. Well known for when she didn't get her way, slamming the door and being stuck in her own room for 2 or 3 days, refusing to come out. Absolutely pitched a fit about everything. Every holiday, not some holidays, but every holiday, she would change every rule to not allow anybody to control, even when the meal was going to be made. I'm not making this story up. Absolute tyrant. For years and years and years, that husband was so beaten down, so broken down. He lived in fear, constantly going, shh, don't say anything that might upset her. A petty tyrant. And don't think that men can't become this. Where do you think wife beaters come from? Nobody in my household does anything unless I say it. Absolute petty tyrants like Herod. Gang leaders, cutthroat businessmen who underpay and overwork. People in our culture that live, eat, and sleep an attack on Jesus. How many of you have noticed some of the new atheists and their vicious attacks on the Christian faith? They will not tolerate anybody who will threaten their authority to say what they're going to do, say, and think in their lives. Little mini Herods running around. Part of human nature. Anything that threatens our power. Proverbs 21:2 says this, every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but it is the Lord who weighs the hearts. You see, if we're not careful, there can be a little bit of Herod in every one of us. There can be. It's possible. See, if we try to make up our own rules for life, nobody's going to tell me how to live. I'm going to find a way to reinterpret that scripture to make it look like I can do whatever I want to do. Don't believe me? I'm studying theology for my master's degrees, and there are entire seminaries that are devoted to showing how Jesus didn't really say that, and Jesus didn't really say this, and Jesus didn't really mean that. And we're going to boil it down to some existential experience, and you can just make it up the way you want. Entire seminaries. People with PhDs coming up with this nonsense. Why? Because they're little Herods. You and I can become that whenever and wherever we decide that Jesus didn't really mean it. I started this message with saying that Jesus, who is God in the flesh, fully affirmed that every word in the Bible is God's word. It is the truth. He confirmed every word of the Old Testament, and he promised that the Holy Spirit would reveal the new. So he has confirmed everything from Genesis to Revelation and said this is his word. It is absolute truth. But the question is, will we accept it? Or will we be like Herod? Interesting question. Matthew chapter 2, verse 17 brings up another reaction to Jesus and his story. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning. Rachel, weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Somebody had to carry out Herod's orders. Herod didn't kill those children himself. The soldiers did. And think about these soldiers. I mean, if you're a Roman soldier, you basically have one choice. You do what your officers command, or you will die. But your officers just commanded you to break down every door in a village and grab every toddler, every male toddler you see. and run them through with a sword. What you gonna do? Are you willing to die because that is evil and that is wrong? Well, they weren't. They weren't willing to die. Their own lives were more precious than doing what was right. They were by far more interested in following orders because it's a whole lot easier to go along with what everybody else is doing and not ask the questions, the hard questions about, is this right? How many videos have we seen in the last 6 months or a year of people looking right into the camera and saying, well, I know it's a baby. I mean, I'm picking out pieces of kidneys and brains. I know it's a baby, but I'll ignore it, and it's my job, and I'm just following orders. Nuremberg trials. How many of the Nazis sat on the witness stand after killing tens of thousands of people and saying, just following orders. Just following orders. Soldiers, Nazis, abortion clinic workers. So easy to just do what everybody else is doing. I mean, they're not philosophers. They're not leaders. They didn't want to think about it. They just go along with the system. You know, there's some people in our culture, how many of you know, they'll do anything to be accepted. I mean anything. Just go to college. I mean, just go to college. Everybody's partying. Everybody's drinking. Everybody's sleeping around. And it's no big deal. Everybody's doing it. Just obey the orders of your culture. God's word says, you shall not fornicate. But the culture says you will. So you just obey orders. Or you obey the orders of your own hormones and desires rather than the living God who said do not. You see, we follow orders. Lots of us do that. Lots of people do that. And those soldiers, they didn't want to ask who the baby in the manger was that caused all this in the first place. I mean, if you ask that question, why is this baby so special that we have to go kill everybody in town? Nobody wanted to ask that. Because if you answered it, you wouldn't be able to follow through. And in the same way, in our culture, people don't want the Christmas story to mean what it means, because if you ask the question, who is that baby in the manger? The answer is the living God in human flesh. And what he says is absolute truth. And he said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. And he was the one that said, your word, Father God, it is truth. We don't want to know who he is. We would rather think about jingle bells and presents. Because if we ask that question, whose orders should we obey? The culture or his? Somebody say amen. Amen. His. The baby in the manger. So we don't want to ask that question. We don't want to really know. Matthew 7:13, Jesus made it clear. He said, enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. And he's making the point that real truth is narrow in its scope. It's this many and this many is this many, and there is nothing else. Every other answer is wrong. Even though some answers are nearer being right than others, it doesn't matter. There's only one right answer. And Jesus says, I am the answer. I am the way. I am the rightful king of your life. So whose orders are you going to obey? The culture or his? And that's why we don't want to ask the question. You see, I think if we're not careful, there can be a little bit of the soldier in all of us too. If we're not careful. See, whenever we refuse to seek God, whenever we just go along with the culture instead of standing up and saying, this is right, even if it cost me my life, those soldiers would have died if they said no to that order. But if you've been watching the news long enough, the day is coming in this country when you're going to have to decide whether or not you will stand for Jesus or die Don't think it won't happen. I've been warning you for years. It's coming. And that's something we don't want to ask. But you know what I've discovered? And this is kind of a freaky thing, but the truth is, Jesus came for Herod. He did. He came for the soldiers. He came for the innkeeper too. He did. He came for all of us. Even though they want to destroy themselves and destroy everyone around them, even though they want to kill Jesus himself, he came even for them. Luke chapter 2, verse 15 says, when the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds, remember those guys? Angels came and said, hey, something exciting's happening in town. Let's party. And they went, what are we partying about? This is good. They said to one another, let's go into Bethlehem and see this thing that's happened. I mean, I would. How many of you would do that? Hey, the Lord has told us about this. So they hurried off. And they found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in the manger. You know, these shepherds, I'm here to tell you, they were not wise men. They weren't well-educated guys. They were just hired hands. I mean, and they were low on the totem pole. As low as it gets. The odds are they didn't even own the sheep. I mean, who wants to stay out all night watching a bunch of sheep? Not the guy that owns the sheep. I'm going to hire somebody else to do it. Somebody that did not graduate from high school. Right? Pay less than minimum wage and get away with it. They're just putting in a hard day's night. Hired hands, simple guys. But they were surprised. Listen, they were surprised by a great truth, a great event. Right up in their face. And how did they respond to it? As soon as God stepped in, as soon as they were surprised by him, they responded immediately. Let's hurry into town. Let's run in and find out what's going on. They responded and they left the sheep. Left the job. They left everything to respond to God as soon as he confronted them. Do you see it? You see, there's so many people. They get surprised by God, but they don't respond. They harden their hearts. They don't respond. This happens, and as a pastor, I cannot tell you the number of times in the last 10, 12 years now that we've been doing this, that somebody out there, some innkeeper-like person out there, too busy, they get surprised by God because of some gigantic crisis. And lo and behold, somebody, a part of this church, just happens to be there for them. What a coincidence. They get surprised by the love of God. And they'll come to church 2 or 3 times. They're just so blown away. Wow, all this love. And then you never see them again. They go back to the inn. They go back to being a soldier or being Herod. They don't really respond. They get surprised by God. But it is so easy to explain everything away. That wasn't really God. That was just a coincidence. That wasn't really God speaking through that person or through that love. No. That was, just my luck. Thank you for the help. I'll take it from here. That's an attitude, isn't it? There's a lot of people out there that don't realize how fortunate they are in life. Or if they do, they think it's their own effort. I worked hard. That's why I've got all of this in my life. Yes, I had a crisis. Thank you, some people from that weird church down there. They helped us out. I got it from here. Listen, I've been to a third world country. Everything you got here, you're the richest on earth. And it's not because of your doing. You didn't ask to be born in this country, or you didn't ask to be able to come here as an immigrant. You didn't ask for that. God allowed it. To whom much is given, much is required. But the problem is that people are suddenly surprised about how blessed they are when they hear about people in Haiti, how blessed they are when they hear about people in Africa or whatever it happens to be. But instead of saying, I've been surprised by how blessed I am. I've been surprised by God. I've been confronted. Let me go and respond to it right away. Let me change my life. Instead of being the shepherds, they just go back. They just go back. You see, you might say to yourself, I just stumbled on this video on YouTube. Just a coincidence to hear a message like this that just happens to be hitting me right between the eyes. Because I feel a lot like that innkeeper or Herod or the soldiers. It's just a coincidence that you're here listening. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. But the question is, will you be humble the way they were and respond to it and say, yes, God? Or you'll find a reason to explain it all away and be somewhere else next Sunday. See, there could be a little bit of the shepherd in every one of us. There could be. We could be willing to respond because Jesus came for shepherds. Jesus is the shepherd, the good shepherd. Isn't that true? There's one other group. We sing about them. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi, the wise men, came from the east to Jerusalem, and they asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. Who are these wise men? They were seekers of truth. They studied it out. They knew the Old Testament scriptures, and they weren't even Jews. They were probably from Babylon, and they were probably people who had studied the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, they knew that something was happening over in Jerusalem. They knew it was coming. And they read the Old Testament, the book of Numbers, chapter 24, verse 17 says, a star shall come out from Jacob. And when they added it all together, the book of Daniel and the book of Numbers and everything we've heard, they went, something is happening. We've got to go find it. We've got to go search it out. We've got to study it out. We've got to know. It takes a lot of hard work to learn. It takes a lot of hard work to study. It takes a lot of hard work to dig for the truth. You know, some people, they look at all the history that I talk about, because how many of you know I'm one of those cerebral kind of guys? I'm into all that stuff. Here's why the history says this. Here's why there's documents. Here's why the New Testament is reliable. Here's why you can believe it. Truth, 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 truth. And a lot of people don't want to hear it. I've had many people come to this church and go, you know what? I didn't want to go to a college lecture, dude. Just wanted to feel good. Well, this ain't your church. Because I'm going to teach you. Amen. But if you respond like the wise men, you go, I'm looking for truth. I want to search it out. I want to study it out. I want to know. You know, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 says that you should be ready to give a defense for your faith to anyone who asks. But you know, that's going to take hard work. That means in the spring, in January, when you come to our training session for ministry, that means you're going to have to sign up for the class on why the Bible can be trusted. Oh my gosh, that means you're going to have to come some weeknight, 9 weeks in a row, to hear me give you a college lecture. But maybe you don't want to be obedient to 1 Peter 3:15. Maybe you don't want to study it out. But Jeremiah 29:13 says this, and you will seek me, find me, when you search for me with all your heart. How many of you want to find God? Well, you're not going to find God by just some good experience. You're going to have to study. But you got to be like the wise men to do that. So that's the question I want to close with. Who are you? Are you the innkeeper? Too busy? I mean, are you like Herod and you know it and you know you've got to change? That you've got this raging anger that keeps coming out in your home and you're trying to control everybody and you darn well know you got to change it? Are you the soldier, and you know how easily and how quickly you are drawn into doing what is ungodly. Are you willing to become one of the shepherds or one of the wise men? Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to say, you know what? Jesus said, if my right hand offends me, hack it off. And if I'm one of the soldiers, if I'm constantly being lured into something evil, then I've got to hack off that hand. That means I've got to surround myself with believers. That means I have to surround myself with being involved here so that I'm not drawn in, because I know that's the kind of person I am. Are you willing to respond? And the question is, how? The innkeeper was too busy. The soldiers were following along. Herod was not a Hebrew. That's the question. Those of us that are Christians, we understand the story. Rebel-occupied territory, God himself invaded. What an invasion. In a manger, in the straw, in humility. But he invaded. And lived an absolutely extraordinary life. Sinless. Never made a mistake. Never said the wrong thing. Can you imagine? Every word out of his mouth was absolute truth. Was able to do things that no one but God could do. Turning water into wine, walking on water, curing incurable diseases instantaneously. The blind could see. The deaf could hear. The lame could walk. Raised the dead more than once. And then raised himself. Why? Because of Herod and the innkeeper and the soldiers. That would be you and me. Because if we're all honest, every last one of us have done and said and thought things that God hates. We all have. We've all been the soldier, we've all been Herod, and we've all been the innkeeper, every last one of us. But Jesus came for those people, for you. The question is, how will you respond? Let's pray.